Hey friends, welcome to TechHarvesting. In today's video, we are actually going to look at databases, what they are, how we work with them with JavaScript, and we'll specifically be covering MongoDB, which is a NoSQL database. And if you don't know what database is or what a NoSQL database means, that's not a problem because I'll be explaining to you in today's video. So let's get started. Wait. Before we start, make sure you subscribe to my channel, which encourages me to do more videos. And now let's start. So to get started, I would like to explain to you what a database actually is. So by the name itself, you'll get to know that a database is something that helps us to store our data. So we can store all the data of our applications in a database. Now, for giving an example, if you're using a shopping application like Amazon, what Amazon does is that it stores all the information about its users, the orders that they make, the reviews on the products, and everything is stored in a database. So everything that you store in your application is stored in a database. And a database also is a very essential part of your application. Next, let's have a look at what MongoDB is. So MongoDB is just a database, which is a NoSQL database or a non-relational database. So there are actually two types of databases, relational and non-relational. So relational databases consist of tables and rows, and some examples are like, for example, MySQL, PostgreSQL, and many more. And if you're using NoSQL databases, which is like MongoDB, you have other kind of data methods, like you mostly use JSON, and they're also called as document databases because we don't store them in tables. So in this video, we're actually gonna make a book API where we can create books and we can get the books, and we're gonna store all this information about the books on a database which is hosted on cloud.mongodb.com, which is a cloud database which we can get for free. So what you can do is to go ahead onto their website, sign up for an account, it's free, and create an organization and create a project. And then when you reach this page, not this one right here, you have to create a database. So click on build a database button, and there are all these options in here. We're going for the shared one, which is the free one. And click on that. And you're gonna choose the cloud provider. I'm gonna go with the default one, which is AWS. And here at the bottom there's a region where your database is gonna be. You can keep it here, and you can also choose the one that's closest to your region if you want. It'll become a bit faster, but that doesn't matter. Next, you're gonna go for a cluster name. You can rename a cluster if you want, just like that. And you can hit create cluster button. It's gonna create a cluster, and a cluster is like a collection of databases. So we can have multiple databases in a single cluster. This might take some time to create. By the time we have some other setup to do. So go onto this database access page, click on add new database user, and you're gonna add a user. So you can do that. Name, and you're gonna give a password. Scroll down and hit on the add user button. Now it creates a user. This is the username and some authentication methods. The role, so we can read and write to any database, and all resources can be accessed. Next, we're going to go into the network access, and we're going to add an IP address. So from where can we access our database, since it's hosted on the cloud. You can also host it on your local computer, so you can install MongoDB, but I'm not going to do that for this video. So we're going to click on allow access from anywhere. If you want, you can add your current IP address, but I'm going to do this so we can access from any machine. And then you can hit confirm. It's pending now. It might take a few seconds, and even if you go back to your database, you'll see it might be pending. So we'll be back once it's done. Now our project is created on MongoDB, our cluster is created. Now we're going to click the connect button, click on connect your application, and you're going to copy this URL. You'll need it later when you want to connect it to our database. So now let's initialize our project. We are also going to install a few dependencies like Express and Mongoose. And Mongoose is a package which we use for controlling the database, so we can create and remove data. We can do multiple things with the database. It just makes it much easier to use the native MongoDB driver for JavaScript. Like you can get more easy ways to use MongoDB. It's also called the object model for MongoDB. You can use it with JavaScript. This is their website. You can go to the documentation if you want to know more, but we'll be using that today. So first let's initialize our project with npm. So we're going to do npm init-y. So it gives us the default package.json. Hit enter, and you see that you're gonna get the default package.json file in here. So if I bring this down, you can see that here. Next, let's go ahead and install our dependencies, which are like Express and Mongoose, which I already told. So you're going to do npm install Express Mongoose and hit enter. Now I'll come back once this is done. It might take a few seconds. Now once that's done, we can go ahead and create our app.js file, which is our main application file. So app.js. Let me just close my terminal. Now let's create a basic Express application. And in case you don't know how to create a small API like this, you can refer my video on creating REST APIs. I'll link it down below so you can create a small API like this with Express and you'll understand how it works. So now let's create the application. Let's make it listen on the port. So 3000, and then create an arrow function. Let's make it log server started, and let us create a route. So app.get / request and response, and we are gonna and let's do a rest.send hello. So now let's open up our terminal and let's go and run nodemon app.js. If you want, you can create a script also, but I'm just going to do this way. You can see server has started, and if we go on to localhost 3000, you'll see that we get hello. So our basic application is now working. Next, let's bring in MongoDB or Mongoose into our project. So let's go and write in const mongoose equals require mongoose. So that's going to bring in Mongoose into our project. Now we can use all the Mongoose methods. So first I'm going to set up a try catch and error, and in here I'm going to do console.error, and let's pass the error object. So in case we're not able to connect, we will run this catch block and it will log the error into our console. But now let's try to connect to our database. So for that, we're going to use the connect function from Mongoose. So we're going to do mongoose.connect. And now, as I told you, you have to copy that URL. If you don't have it, you can go here and you can click on this connect button, which will bring up this, connect your application, and from there you can choose the driver as Node.js and the version as 3.7 or later, and you can copy this URL from here. So click on the button to copy, and you can paste that in here. Now this is going to give this long URL. There are some things that you have to change in here. So for example, I have to change this password. I just put mine as Nasil123. And you have to also change this thing here. The default gives us a URL for my first database as the name of the database, but we want it to be books. So, and remember, don't get confused with cluster and database. So this is the cluster where we hold all our databases. So in this, if you go to collections, which is where all the databases are there currently should be nothing. So when we start to add data, it should start coming there. So this is the database which we want to connect to. Now if you go to terminal, you will see all these things. Current URL, string parcel deprecated. That's just some warnings which we'll fix soon. But you can see that it's connected. But if you want to make sure that it is, you can just pass in a callback function asking maybe log connected to MongoDB. Now if you look in your console, once it's connected, you will get the message connected to MongoDB, which means our connection was successful. which actually means that we got to connect to this cloud server which hosts our MongoDB database. Now we have these warnings in here. Let's just get rid of those. So you can see to use the new parser, pass option new URL parser colon true to the Mongo client. Just copy that one and let's give it as an object in here and put a comma there. So these are all the options in here. We have given use new URL parser to true, and now if you check, there are more warnings. So you have to also pass in use unified topology to true. Let's do that also now. Yep. Now if we look, it should stop those warnings and we get service started and connected to MongoDB, which means our Express API is started and also we have connected to MongoDB successfully. Next, let's have a look at creating a schema, which is a very important part of Mongoose when we use it with MongoDB. So a schema is essentially an object which has all the types of data in your object which you want to store. For example, if you want to have a book, you might have an author for the book's number of pages, or the date it was published. You can do like different fields and mainly the name of the book itself. So for using that, you'll need to use a schema. Now if I go onto the Mongoose website here, you will see this is the documentation for schema when you're using with MongoDB and Mongoose. So let's just do that right now. I'm just gonna close that. And for creating a schema, we are gonna create a variable. So const book schema equals mongoose dot schema, and that's a function where you're given some objects, and in here you're gonna give in the fields of our book. In our case it's a book, depends on what you're doing, but right now it's a book, so we're gonna give all the fields for our book, and we're also going to give the type for it. For example, we can give a name for the book and you can make it a string. Then you could have maybe pages, which is a number, and you could give an author, which is a string. For now, since it's a small project kind of thing, we'll just leave it with those schema values. So this essentially has all the values we use for our data. For example, if we want to get all the books, it will return all the books and it will show us the books. Like it has this name, it has this page and this author. And another great feature of MongoDB, while using it with the MongoDB kind of database or a NoSQL database, is that it inserts an extra field called ID other than all these three fields, so we can access these data like independently. That's another feature of using these kind of document databases. And the next part of doing this is to create a model. So this is the documentation for creating a model. A model is just a simple part, like you create a schema and you want to have multiple objects with that schema. For that you need to have a model. So that's also a very easy thing to do. All you need to do is from our schema, you're just gonna run this thing. So I'll just show it to you right now. So you're gonna create a book now. So for creating books, you'll need to have your schema. So let's do const book equals new mongoose dot model, actually, so model, and you can see the documentation here also, and we actually don't need new in here, so let's just remove that, and here we need new actually while creating the schema. So in here we are giving this name for our model, which is actually the name we are giving to the object itself, and then we're gonna give the reference to our schema. So the name for the model is gonna be book, and MongoDB or Mongoose will actually auto format it to books. We showed in the database, so you have to actually give it in here as book, the singular form. And then we are gonna give the name of the schema, so it's book schema. And in this way, when we want to create a new object, we can use the Mongoose methods, and we can give like a book.find to find all the objects, or book.find where this the ID of the book is this one. So we can get like particular objects or all the objects, and we can do all those kind of stuff with the help of a model. Next is to give functionality to our API so that we'll be able to query our database or ask our database some data, and we'll be able to return it back to us. So I'm just going to remove this rest.send in here, And in here I'm gonna make this an async function, because when we use Mongoose, we are gonna deal with promises in JavaScript. So you'll need to make your function async, or you can use dot then dot catch syntax, but for now I'm using async await, which is what most people nowadays are using. So for finding all these users in our database, we can do a const books equals, and we're gonna reference our book model in here. So we're gonna do book dot, and there are so much methods in this, but as I told, we have to make this asynchronous. We'll do that soon, but let us just see how we can like get all the methods. So the first one we're going to use is find. So find is a method which is used to find all the objects in a database. So you do find and you do that, and that's going to return us all the objects in our database, but we'll need to give an await in here for us to return all the objects properly. So let's do await book.find, and let's do that. So what this does is it's gonna fetch the books from our database, and it's gonna store it into this variable called books. Next, let's return it to our client, so that when we send the API request, we're gonna get it back. So we're gonna do a rest.send, and we're gonna send the books. So this is gonna just send back the books which we get from this query in our database. With we are waiting for it to return the promise, and just gonna do that. So now if you return and refresh, you will see that you get this empty array because there are no books in our database currently. If you want, we could just go ahead and add some here, like add my own database name of books, and do all those things if we want, but let's just do it through our code. And one other thing that I want to say, tell to you is that when we use Mongoose, mostly we use it with try catch functions. Try catch error, and that prevents us from getting errors while we do our code, so that our API doesn't crash completely if there's some small error. And we can do a error console.error, so console.error, and we're gonna put that error message into the error object, so in case there's some problem here, for example, if we do something else. And if we try that now by hitting that route, it will not return us anything, but you can see the error gets logged in here. So that's why we use try catch functions. Next, let's try to create a book. So we are gonna do an app.post, since we use post requests for creating stuff. And if you have not seen my video on REST APIs, do check it out. I explain all these things in there. And we're gonna get /books, and we're gonna do our arrow function. And since we are dealing with Mongoose, we're gonna create a new object into our database. We're gonna make this an async function. And yeah, so we're gonna create a book in. Next, let's implement a try catch so that we'll get to know if there are any errors and we can log it into a console. So try catch error, and in here we're gonna console.error and error. So this error, whenever we get, we will log it to our console. You can also make it a console.log if you want, but I'm just going to keep it a console.error, which is what most people use, because that's the error functionality with the console object. So let us now look at how we can create an object. So the first thing we must do is to go ahead to the top, and where we create our application, we want to use the express JSON middleware so that we can get information from our user when the user sends data and add to our database. So we're going to do app.use so that we can create this middleware to be used by the application, and we're going to express.json. So now if we go down, we'll be able to get the objects in the spec.body, so that when we send a request, we can like send some JSON data, and the the API will be able to get to know what we sent. So let's do for creating an object, for creating like a new book, we're going to do const book equals await. Make sure you have async in here, and we're going to await for book dot create, and In here we're going to pass in the fields which we gave at the top. So we had given some fields in here like the name, the pages, and the author. So we're going to provide that in here so that our code will understand what kind of objects, what kind of book it should create. So first is the name, then the pages, then the author. Doesn't matter if it's in any order, but let's do a name, and we're going to make it rec.body.name because we had enabled the express JSON middleware, so we'll be able to get everything in the body object. Next, let's create the pages, and pages maybe 300. Actually, we're going to send to our API request, so it's actually rec.body.pages, and this is not rest, this is rec because the request, we are getting the pages from the request. And the last thing to do is the author, so let's do that also. So author to the request dot body dot author. So what this does, it's just going to create a new entry in our database, and when we do this request we should get it back. So just for confirmation that we get that book is created, we're just going to do a rest.send, and we can send the book. So once the book is created, it's going to be sent back to the user. Next, I'm going to launch a Postman just to test if it works. So I'll just create a new request, and I'm going to make it a post request to http://localhost 3000/books, I guess, books. And next, let's go to the body, and we're going to go for raw and make this JSON. So we're sending some JSON data. Now let's first, we need the name for the book, so name of test book 1, and let's have the pages, and let's also have the author. This is JSON if you don't know, ABC. Now what we can do is we can send the request, and you can see that we get the new object, like the details of the object. It gets an underscore ID, which I told is auto-generated by MongoDB. So now if we open a new tab and send a request to http localhost 3000, we should be able to get all the books, which we get indeed. And also in the browser, if you do the same thing, if you refresh, you can see we get the same thing. And this is looking like this because I have an extension called JSON for JSON formatter, I guess, JSON Viewer Pro. So it just makes this look better, and it may not look like this at the beginning. And I already created this object just for testing at the beginning, so that's also there in here. You can create more books, like you just have to go ahead, change this, like test book 2, pages 205, and author somebody. Now if we send this request, we'll be getting the new person that's created, and all these IDs are unique IDs. And if we go to our get request and remake the get request, resend it, we get all the 3 objects. So these 2 are created right now. So that's about creating and getting the data from MongoDB. Next, let's create the functionality that we'll be able to get a single book with the ID. So like if you go to the address of the API /books/ and we give like the ID for the book, we should be able to get the book with that particular ID. So for doing that, let's create a new get request. So app.get, we're gonna go for books/ and we'll go for maybe :ID. Now this makes it a dynamic URL, which means we'll have some kind of ID in here if you have a colon before, and it's just gonna have some extra details so that we'll get to know which ID we want to find or which book we want to find. Next, let's create our arrow function with the request and response, and make it async because we're dealing with Mongoose and MongoDB. Next, let's do a try catch, error, and console.error error, And let's now try to find a single object with its ID in our database, from our database. So we're going to get this ID that we pass in from the rect.params object. So let's just do const book equals await book dot, and we're going to use the method find by ID. So find by ID, and we're going to pass in the ID. Now the ID is coming from the rec.params.id object, since this is the parameter that we're giving here. So you can do rec.params.id. The next thing is that we're going to send it back. So we're just going to do res.send book, and that's all we need to do for getting this functionality. So now if we go ahead, create a new request to http localhost 3000 to get all the books at first. So we get all these books. Just copy the ID of a particular book, give us /books/ and you give the ID of that book. Hit enter. Now we're gonna get the book with that particular ID, which is awesome. So we can get all the books. We can get a single book. We can create books. If you want, we can create a put request and a delete request to like update a book and delete a book. And actually, that was it for this video. I want to show you how you can use Mongoose, which is an object modeling functionality for MongoDB, and how you can use the database, store your data. And if you go and look at your database right now, and for example, refresh it in here, you'll be able to find there's the books with the books collection and all these books in here. So we are storing our objects in the database. And yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel for more amazing videos like this, and I'll see you in the next